Just realized that's very unconvincing. There's not even coffee in this thing. Not anymore. The political compass is bad, actually. Not only is it bad, it must be destroyed. Hi, I'm Tristan Johnson, an actual historian and someone who's been involved in radical politics since 2009. Now, I want to introduce you to a new friend on the show. He's a new guy trying to get into politics. His username is, anarcho-monarcho-syndicalist 420. Hello. Oh God, we're doing puppets again. Hello, everybody. Oh no, that's a terrible voice. Hello, everybody. I'm an off-left anarcho-monarchist. This past year, I've been a classical liberal with Chinese characteristics, an anti-woke social justice artificer, monarcho-Stalinist, libertarian autocrat, sock-dem, dem-sock, and a conservative. Now, anarcho-monarcho-syndicalist 420, that's a lot of extremely different and mutually exclusive radical political ideologies with very different ideas on how the world should work. How are you able to change your worldview so drastically in such a short amount of time? What are you basing this all on? Well, mostly I like debate streamers, JREG videos, the Paradox Plaza forums, and about 100 or so Discord servers. Okay, that's enough. Do you actually know what any of those political words mean? Well, you see, it all comes down to the political compass. There's basically 4 quadrants: your basic left-right, and then your authoritarian and libertarian. Take any test, and you'll see where you fit in on this handy chart. Then it's just a matter of finding the right tendency with the best memes for your metrics. We have a lot of work to do, buddy. First of all, politics isn't a fandom. There's a lot of real things on the line with high stakes for a lot of people. And there's also a lot of history involved. And if you just see politics through a simple Cartesian plane, you're going to get a grotesquely oversimplified idea of how the political spectrum actually functions. You're going to end up in a lot of weird and dark places. So maybe before you elaborate more on your political beliefs, I should look into, and nobody else should look into, the political compass and hopefully put you onto some more stable footing. Are you down for a little bit of a political history lesson? Will there be tanks? If I say no, will you leave? Okay, then yes, lots of them. So I guess to begin our understanding of the landscape of political ideology, we're going to have to look into the most basic idea of how we categorize political belief in our modern day age, and that is the age-old term of the left and right wing. And it actually has its origins all the way back to the French Revolution, where the Assemblée Nationale had a seating arrangement set up where the president was in the middle, and to his right, that's my right, the L makes the left. I'm left-handed, how do I not know this? To his right sat all of the people who were loyal to the king and wanted to preserve the privileges and rights of the monarchy, and to his left were the radical liberal reformers who wanted to unseat the monarchy and turn France into a true republic. Eventually this norm developed into a sort of lunch table type situation, and the people who worked in the Assemblée Nationale were basically starting to define themselves through what wing of the building they sat in. But in 1791, the Assemblée Nationale was replaced with a legislative assembly where the divisions continued. Those who wanted a lot more radical change still sat on the left, while moderates sat in the middle, and on the right, you had conservative defenders of the Constitution sitting down in the place where the defenders of the Ancien Régime used to sit. It's all French terms to say that the people who used to support the king were replaced with people who wanted to make sure that things changed as little as possible. But even so, the term left and right never developed into a solidified idea of political ideology, just where people sat in the legislature. And this model continued in French politics. Sometimes they were called innovators and defenders of the Constitution. Sometimes they were called democratic socialists and reactionaries. But in 1871, when France established its Third Republic, this got codified into the names of the political parties. And so these are the actual names of the political parties. They went by names like the Republican left, the center left, the radical left, the extreme left, the center left, or even the center right. Man, I wish that was the selection of political parties these days. Today it's just, what flavor of right wing do you want to vote for? And by the early 20th century, left and right became new categorical terms to refer to different areas of French political thought, replacing reds and the reaction. But of course, they began as slurs. because, and to the Americans this is going to sound very confusing, the left wanted to refer to themselves as Republicans, and the right wanted to refer to themselves as conservatives. From France, it spread around the world to become a shorthand for various different types of political ideologies, meaning vastly different things in virtually every country. And this also represents a change in the political landscape in a lot of these countries, because before the 20th century, a lot of politics, like electoral politics, the idea of it being based on ideology was actually a little foreign. A lot of the times, for example, I'll use the United States as an example because that's what I know. In the United States, before probably the early 20th century, probably up until maybe the, depending upon how you argue about it, 1912 versus like maybe the Nixon administration, the parties did not represent so much ideologies as much as they represented different types of constituencies in different places. If you were, say, a poor immigrant living in New York, you were almost definitely a Democrat. If you were a northern industrialist, you were almost certainly a Republican. If you were a poor white Southerner who was deeply racist and wanted to reinforce white supremacy, you were definitely a Democrat. And if you were a poor black Southerner, you were almost definitely a Republican, up until roughly the 1920s, when then, if you were poor and black in the South, you were also definitely a Democrat, and that was a very uncomfortable coalition. But that was generally the rule about how things worked. You weren't so much believing in conservative or liberal values, you were part of the party that your dad voted for or that somebody offered you money to vote for. And in order to get votes, you didn't sort of appeal to different ideas. You were like, here's $20, go out and get me 1,500 Irish votes. But in the most broad sense, there are some vague adjectives you could use to describe left and right-wing politics that crosses into all of these different countries. For example, the definition of the left is roughly an idea of equality, rights, internationalism, progress, reform. Under that umbrella is a huge amount of extremely different ideologies. For example, under the left, you could consider a social liberal, someone who has progressive values about social strata and, hierarchies and bigotry, but still believes in a free market economy. A Democrat.
We choose truth over facts.
You also have progressives, people who generally believe in the idea that life on Earth can be improved if we just understand and implement programs to improve things. You then got left libertarians who believe in maximization of individual freedom, but still believe strongly in social equality. You've got social democrats who believe in a sort of mixed economy of communist and capitalist with a lot of public intervention in order to ensure social equality. You've also got the very confusing other term, democratic socialist, which is a term for people who wish to implement a workers-owned, completely public economy. Basically, no private property, no capitalism, but one that still steadfast dedicates itself to maintaining democracy in some fashion. In many ways, a lot of democratic socialists also believe that they can achieve socialism instead of through revolution, but through electoralism. You have socialism, which is the ideology of believing that the economy should be socially owned rather than privately owned. You then have communists who, for various different strategies, want to completely eliminate the concept of private ownership and make everything socially owned through either revolution or strong state or something of that fashion. And then you've got anarchists, people like me, who are skeptical of the entire concept of hierarchy, and if a hierarchical system can't be justified, even something like a state, it should be abolished and replaced with something more egalitarian that does the same function. Typically, that abolition extends to governments, states, and capitalism. The definition of the right is usually a focus on private property, traditionalism, hierarchical social structures. This includes conservatives, people who believe in trying to maintain social and political structures the way they are. You have right libertarians who believe very strongly that individual freedom includes private property and want to move as many things as possible into private hands. These are the kind of people that when you ask them about their opinion on AOC, they say it should be lowered. The most extreme version of that would be anarcho-capitalists or ANCAPs, who are people who believe that there should be no state at all and that literally everything should be privately owned. An example of this would basically be feudalism. But right-wing politics doesn't really mean small government. You also have groups like neoconservatives who believe in a strong central state. This is an ideology that developed in the United States that's focused on having an extremely hawkish and militaristic foreign policy and about establishing U.S. power wherever you go. The right wing also includes monarchists, people who believe in keeping the structure of a monarchy, imperialists, people who wish to expand the influence of a country abroad by conquering and imposing themselves on others. Reactionaries, people who are angry at the current status quo and wish to return things to the way that they were in a previous and usually imagined age. And the extreme version of all these ideologies, fascism.
Oh, hell yeah. I found a way to make it about fascism again.
The idea of creating an extremely strong state that uses violence and brutality in order to enforce a strong hierarchical order that they believe is based through science, and through sheer force of will and through violent oppression, restoring the state to some imagined idea of what the past could be in order to lead a period of national restoration. People are going to give me shit for that definition because there's as many definitions of fascism as it seems there are people, but that's more or less the Umberto Eco answer. But what you can see is that left and right wing, while they have, some vague use, they are very broad categories that encapsulate a lot of extremely different areas of political thought. And therefore, to say that someone is left or right wing, or even defining where the center is on left and right wing, is complicated and not really one that has a lot of use. And in America specifically, as of 2005, the concept of left and right wing is still even a little foreign. More Americans understand the term liberal and conservative to roughly mean the same thing, despite the fact that liberalism and conservatism have completely different political definitions that don't even apply to the ideas of left and right necessarily. Like by the dictionary definition, like political scientist definition of liberalism, you would consider Joe Biden a left liberal, and that the most hardcore liberals are anarcho-capitalists. I'm not alone on this. A lot of political scientists have pointed out that the typical metric of the left-right spectrum are not really that useful, and have tried to fix it by adding new axes of politics to create multi-dimensional hypercubes of political metrics in order to categorize people into all of their different categories. The most famous one being the one that, you probably clicked on this video because I put it in the title, the political compass. The political compass is probably the most well-known version of an attempt to redefine the left-right spectrum by adding a new axis. It's this thing right here. In addition to a left-right spectrum, you also have an authoritarian-libertarian spectrum. What this does is, instead of dividing all of politics into two camps, it divides it into four. You have your left libertarians.
Cool. Thanks me filming. You called authoritarian left, libertarian left. Very cool. Very good. Am I going to record that again? No, because it's Saturday. My birthday is tomorrow, and I think you get the gist.
The ones who would say kill the fascist, your Stalinists, your Maoists, your multi-level marketing, Marxist, Leninist, Maoists, you know the type. You have your authoritarian right, which is basically every form of nationalist, fascist, and virtually every Western politician. They're the ones that, when asked about what to do about fascism, would say that they are the fascists. You have the libertarian left, which, when asked about what to do about fascism, you would say, punch the fascist. Then you have your libertarian right, who, when asked about what to do about fascism, would say, actually, it's a phoebophile. But the political compass, too, doesn't really describe reality. Politicalcompass.org's test includes questions like, what do you think about astrology? Where does astrology fit on this? It's a politics chart, not a star chart. And just like how with left and right wing, it's kind of impossible to determine where a middle point is on that. What is the middle point of authoritarian versus libertarian? For example, most Democrats in the United States promote policies that would put them to the right of the Conservative Party here in Canada. And your average Canadian liberal who'd be considered in the center left would be considered to the right of any conservative in a European country. And in American political discourse, they'd call somebody who was extremely pro-market left-wing if they just didn't like people saying slurs. The scales are all vague and abstract in ways that make measuring it in this way kind of useless. It imposes a form of cleanness and objectivity that just isn't there. Furthermore, left and right wing being big, nebulous categories that you really couldn't truly define, the same is true of authoritarian and libertarian. A right authoritarian...
Oh, thank you me again. Yeah, now it is my birthday, and I just said authoritarian right when I meant libertarian right. This is going great. Thanks, me. I appreciate it.
And supposedly on the extreme part of the personal freedom spectrum would believe that it's okay to own slaves as long as it was entered into through some form of consensual slavery, and whatever coercive forces might force somebody into such an arrangement don't really matter to them. A left libertarian would call something like even consensual slavery an unjust hierarchy, while a right libertarian would say that it's authoritarian to tell them that they don't have the right to own slaves. And a lot of the personal freedom that right authoritarians typically advocate for is usually for the right to discriminate and oppress people. And for those people, society gets more authoritarian, doesn't it? You would think that if the chart worked this way, that the authoritarian left and right would agree on some things, and the libertarian left and right would agree on some things. Just in the same way that the authoritarian and libertarian left and authoritarian and libertarian right agree on some things. But you never see that sort of agreement. You know, for example, a lot of authoritarian leftists and libertarian leftists have the exact same goals. It's just that they have disagreements over what role a state should play in the process of getting to what we all want. And furthermore, it seems that on the right, libertarian and authoritarian rightists don't really seem to disagree on that much at all. And there's a pretty strong pipeline of people going from the libertarian right into straight up fascism, which you would think would be the opposite of their belief structure. So to really get this attempt to measure people's political metrics, I'm going to need to do more hands-on research. So I asked the wonderful Step Back Discord server community if they could find me every single political quiz, and I did them all. All right, so I'm going to do every political compass test that the Step Back Discord audience was willing to throw at me, including the classic: if economic globalization is inevitable, then it should primarily serve humanity rather than the interests of transnational corporations. I mean, yes? Who's against this? I'd always support my country whether it was right or wrong. Our race has made pure... the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Where does that fit on the political spectrum? Military action that defies international law is sometimes justified. Nope. There is now a worrying fusion of information and entertainment. I'm going to say disagree, because as somebody who literally is the fusion of information and entertainment, I should probably be offended by this statement. The only social responsibility as a company should be... The rich are too highly taxed. Screw you. All authority should be questioned. Yes. Including the authority of this test, obviously. Good parents sometimes... Nope. When you are troubled, it's better not to think about it, but to keep busy with more cheerful things. Where does this fit on political stuff? At all. Again, like what? Why? Abstract art that doesn't represent anything shouldn't be considered art at all. What is that? What is this? Is that authoritarian? Is this leftism? Mothers may have career... No. Oh God, no. Some people are just naturally unlucky. What? Where does this... What? All right, let's see where we stand. I bet I'll be really surprised. To nobody's surprise, here I am on the political compass. Now, another problem with this system is that it's a Cartesian plane, and it has limits around the outside. And I would argue in a chart like this, the limits being a hard end versus an infinite spectrum both don't make any sense. Like, to me, I don't really understand there being a maximum amount of libertarianism where no more libertarianism can happen, or it's the other case where it's infinite, in which case there's infinite libertarianisms that we have just yet to explore. I've talked to a bunch of people who've taken the political compass test, and it seems that it does average people's beliefs out in a rather unintuitive way. It seems that no matter who takes it, from the most conservative to the centrist liberal to the radical anarchist like me, and makes them all into some sort of vague libertarian leftist. And also with this compass, with its 4 quadrants, there's a sort of implicit idea when you characterize all these 4 different types of political ideologies that the smartest, most sensible position would be to take some place in the middle. And I tend to think of things like the political compass or left and right as something akin to the body mass index. If you guys don't know, the body mass index is a number that takes your weight and your height and determines whether or not you're overweight. It's kind of useful for understanding weight and people's health at a sort of larger scale, but individually it's very not useful because people's bodies are all very different. And like that, the political compass doesn't really make a lot of sense because everybody's politics are different. Nobody is ever this consistent. Plus, importantly, this chart leaves a lot of ideologies that just flat out don't fit.
We have the arch, and you guessed it, it goes in the square hole.
So as I was studying this political compass, I found tons and tons and tons of political tendencies that really don't fit anywhere on this in any comfortable way. Or, if they did, they would be averaged out and would be sort of reduced to being centrists in a way, which in a lot of ways doesn't really thoroughly describe what they are. Because if you think about it in a Cartesian sense, if somebody had a few very radical right-wing beliefs and a few extremely radical left-wing beliefs, they would just average out to 0. And it would be hard to think of like an anti-Semitic communist as a centrist. Just a few examples of some political tendencies that don't really fit on the compass. First one that comes to mind is Christian democracy. Christian democracy needs no introduction for my European viewers, but for everybody else, let me just give you a quick primer. Christian democracy at its core is supposed to be this marrying of Christian social values with the ideals of a democratic society. And around the world, Christian Democrats come from various different branches of Christianity, and so have very different ideas of what those Christian ideals even are. But at the end of the day, they're all Christian Democrats. Next, you have feminism, which is an ideology that is focused on equality of gender. And the political compass doesn't seem to have an axis for respect women. Maybe if it was a cube, maybe it would be left, right, authoritarian, libertarian, respect or not respect women. And you might say that feminism fits into the broader idea of equality that fits into the left. But do you consider lean in feminism, sort of that, girl boss CEO form of left-wing politics? Do you consider TERFs, who consider themselves radical feminists, who are primarily focused on discriminating against other women? Do you consider that a left-wing ideal? Next, you have regionalism, which is a politics that's primarily defined by increasing the power or autonomy of just one specific group of people or one specific regional area. Next, you have nationalism, which typically falls in the right, but there are many anti-colonial liberatory movements in former colonized countries that were undergirded entirely by nationalism. Like black nationalism. Also, you have populism, an ideology that's focusing on the wants and needs of the common people being a shifting definition, and it has fallen under radical left and radical right-wing movements. Centrist Democrats aside, how would you put on a political compass a movement that contains both Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump? There's also green politics, which is primarily focused on preserving and restoring the environment. And while you would think that is typically a left-wing belief, there are plenty of anti-environmentalist leftists, and there are plenty of very environmentalist conservatives. And I live in Canada, where we have a Green Party that is constantly tearing itself apart between its left and right wing. You also have Juche, which is an aggressively authoritarian left-wing movement that is primarily in North Korea, but also has beliefs that relate to racial purity and things like that. So where does that fit? You then also have a lot of very confused people in the sort of breakdown of fascist and neo-Nazi movements. I'm going to go into a bunch of them, going from historic to modern. First, you have the original Nazis, even before Hitler, actually, the Strasserites, started by brothers Otto and Gregor Strasser. They were some of the original Nazis and had this political ideology based in a broad anti-capitalist workers' movement, but focused around the icon of capitalism being Jews. And so it had this, what's called economic anti-Semitism. If you think about it, economic anti-Semitism is opposed to sort of like a Christian idea of anti-Semitism, which comes from the Bible and all sorts of history and all that kind of stuff. And economic anti-Semitism is sort of blaming all of the economic woes of the world, all of the badness of capitalism on Jewish people, is sort of mainstream now in modern day neo-fascist movements. But surprise, surprise, this belief structure actually wasn't that popular, and Hitler actually expelled the Strassers from the party, one of which had to escape to Czechoslovakia, and the other was killed during the Night of Long Knives. Next, you have National Bolsheviks, or Nazbols as they're affectionately known on the internet, which is a political ideology that is based on a nostalgia for the Bolshevik Soviet model of economics, but is also deeply seated in a extremely right-wing pro-Russian nationalism. Primarily, National Bolshevism was a bit of a meme on the internet, especially in circles that are kind of disturbing, places like Lefty Pol on 8chan, until they got picked up by people like YouTuber JReg.
My name is Little Nas Bull. Hitler and Stalin are both my bros.
Who sort of makes memes about radical ideologies and turned it into a general internet meme. But National Bolshevism is this ideology mixed out of this idea of a more socialist economy, but one that is deeply xenophobic and typically pushes for Russia to expand itself into a greater Eurasian empire. Its intellectual founders being Edward Limonov, who has been arrested for attempting to overthrow the government, and also has written about the idea of force impregnating women between the ages of 25 and 45. You have Yegor Letov, who distanced himself from politics, and you also have the most famous leader, Alexander Dugin. He's gone on to become a big cheerleader of Putin, and Putin's aims for basically expanding Russia into a Eurasian empire. Probably most recently is known for virtually calling for the genocide of all Ukrainians. And just for no reason, here's a picture of him at an event with Caleb Mopin. I don't know why they're at this event together. Maybe someone should ask him. And while Nazbols don't really have that much popularity in Russia anymore, the internet meme has filtered into radical, tiny internet circles, and some of those people who ironically supported it in places like 8chan have started to unironically support it. It's a sort of problem that even JReg has kind of tried to grapple with in his own content. Furthermore, where do you fit in people like, well, what I would call the Tucker Carlson left? People who have really big issues with what they call the professional managerial class. People like Catherine Liu, people like Glenn Greenwald, people like Tulsi Gabbard, where they talk about leftist issues, but they also dislike things like wokeism and are really into preserving traditional values and have positive things to say about nationalism. Leftists, supporting nationalism. Other people in this would probably be Angela Nagel, who wrote an entire book basically blaming the election of Donald Trump on political correctness, and the people who pushed another hashtag, if you could call it, ideology called MAGA communism. What if we embrace Trumpism but make it communist? Like, I don't even know where you put this on a left-right spectrum.
Big pain to base, under attack by commie Nazis.
The two big leaders in this movement are a guy named Haz, who I was so happy not knowing about before I had to research this video, who seems very confused about some aspects of female anatomy, and a guy by the name of Jackson Hinkle, who considers himself an anti-imperialist and a communist and a leftist, but has supported the invasion of Ukraine and repeatedly talks about the threat of globalists, which is essentially a dog whistle term for Jews. He's also made his rounds on the mainstream media platforms that have dedicated themselves to normalizing white nationalism and white supremacy, i.e., One America News Network and Tucker Carlson. Essentially what they're trying to do is, instead of building a new workers' movement around left-wing ideals, to latch onto the workers' movement that is going on in our moment, which they have determined is the backing of Donald Trump for some reason.
We all come together, the workers striking at the railways, the mega industrial working class, the small farmers. We all unite with our power. We kick out the globalists. We kick out George Soros. We kick out Klaus Schwab. We stop that Great Reset agenda in its tracks.
That attempt to graft your movement onto another movement that's successful is called tailism. and it's well known in left-wing circles that it never works out. If you'd like to learn more about MAGA communism, you'd probably do best by watching a video by American Johnson over on Non-Compete, who covered it pretty well. Next, you have accelerationism, which is pushed primarily by a neo-reactionary philosopher by the name of Nick Land. And the essential idea behind this is a leftist point of view that focuses on accelerating all of the bad parts of capitalism, which means that the real leftist thing to do is to have more and more capitalism so that it accelerates faster and basically breaks the system and the revolution comes sooner. Thing though is that Nick Land's beliefs also seem to have a lot of stuff that's like vehemently anti-democracy, and as I mentioned, he's one of the center figures in what's called the Dark Enlightenment or the neo-reactionary movement. Essentially, it's like a socialism, but believes that there are some races that are more naturally intelligent than others, and also wants to embrace things like traditional gender roles. Another movement that would be very confusing to put on the political spectrum is the LaRouche movement, which has some things that are objectively kind of leftist, like bringing back Glass-Steagall and having more control over finance. And then a whole bunch of weird racism and anti-Semitism mixed in as well. And their pro-science stuff also involves a lot of weird pseudoscience.
Oh no, aliens, bioduplication, nude conspiracies. Oh my god, Lyndon LaRouche was right.
It's been referred to as a political cult. And look, there's more Caleb Maupin. Caleb Maupin basically just shows up in every single one of these tendencies here. Also baked into this, you have the Assad/Putin left, which are a group of self-reported leftists who are very opposed to imperialism, but seem to specifically only care about imperialism when it's the United States doing it, when it's, the violent oppression of their own people by the Assad regime, or the invasion of sovereign countries by another power, in the case of Ukraine with Russia. That's fine. And many times these people turn out to just be paid Russian agents anyway. Caleb Maupin. And then you have whatever the hell Jimmy Dore is, where he espouses some socialist beliefs, but then also doubles down on virtually every far-right conspiracy theory he can find. Like, where on the left-right spectrum does being against vaccines and promoting horse dewormer as a medicine to combat COVID fit? These categories are all messy and overlapping, but what I'm trying to point out with this and, all the other different tendencies is that they're all messy and they're all inconsistent and they all overlap because the fundamental rule of understanding history, humans refuse to play by the rules. People in general don't neatly fit into political categories. And trying to latch on to a political ideology and uncritically delving into it puts you into some weird, uncomfortable corners. For example, the last few minutes, I just referred to a bunch of people who refer to themselves as socialists. And what many of them are just fascists. Because fascism actually doesn't super fit into the political spectrum in a lot of comfortable ways. And so they can use the language of virtually any type of politics to cloak their anti-democratic ideals. And this has happened many times historically. In the book Black Shirts and Reds by Michael Parenti, he outlines an entire history of fascists using leftist language in order to coax disaffected leftists or people who are sort of going with the urges of mass politics and follow them into movements that are diametrically opposed to their actual class interests. And sometimes that leads to uncomfortable things like what are called red-brown alliances. Although there are people who do take umbrage with the term red-brown alliances, mostly because it comes up often when they're trying to do their sort of Matrix-style acrobatics to get around talking about the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, which should probably be its own video. Politics is done by humans, and we are illogical, irrational beings. We can have different ideas on a policy depending whether or not we had lunch. We are, despite our best efforts, beings of emotion. At the end of the day, this is why I think the political compass must die. Because it's not only inaccurate, but seeing yourself on that, like a sort of Myers-Briggs of politics, and thinking of your political tribe that way might get you hoodwinked into becoming a fascist by people like this.
Order King.
Because to really understand people's politics, you have to have a lot of nuance and description, and no one is ever going to 100% fit under any ideology. We might have beliefs that come from very different points of the political spectrum, but that's okay. It just means that having this sort of clean and neat category just doesn't work. It's like your Zodiac or your Myers-Briggs type. It's not only not describing reality, but in its attempt to place you in somewhere, it makes you feel like you fit somewhere where you might not. And that's why it not only is bad, but needs to die. Wow. What? That was the most amount of work put into explaining what's just memes, bro. You earnestly believe in political stuff? Kinda cringe, man. Oh, great. You're not only a puppet, but a Zoomer puppet, huh? I know we live in some sort of post-South Park reality where having any sort of earnest opinion is cringeworthy, but this stuff's important. It has consequences, and maybe just looking for places to meme around with your friends, you might be wandering into some dark places. Irony poisoning is real, and I'll explain it to you. Explain it to me. Oh, yeah, there was just supposed to be, Hold on a second. Hey everybody! I just want to let you know that there's an extended version of this video where I talk about the path forward to actually measuring politics in a way that is a reflection of reality rather than trying to impose categories that don't actually fit, and you can watch that on my streaming service, Nebula. Nebula is a platform my friends and I made to put content on where we don't have to worry about YouTube's algorithm or things like demonetization. And today, we're partnering up with CuriosityStream. On Nebula, you get ad-free content and lots of places where your favorite creators can explore and try new types of things. Nebula's got a ton of your favorite creators, and I know because I look at the analytics that they are a lot of your favorites too. I mean, just looking at the big ones, PhilosophyTube, HBomberGuy, a lot of my friends, Jesse Gender, Mia Mulder, NerdSync. Gotta love that little headed boy. The YouTuber that I personally try to rip off as much as I can, Jacob Geller. I don't know if you saw it, but Jacob Geller's most recent video talks about some things that would just not work on YouTube. So for the Nebula version, he can go into topics in this game that he was studying that has to do with nudity, that has to do with licensed music, all things that you just could not put on YouTube without just getting flagged into irrelevance. So this section I've labeled the irony of irony, because as my tiger friend mentioned, it's all just memes is commonly used when talking about the threat of radical ideologies. I had one friend who, in the lead up to the 2016 election, was convinced almost until election day that there wasn't that many hard right Trump supporters, that they were all just being ironic. But the problem is that creating spaces where you can talk about these sort of radical hate-filled ideologies, even if it's ironic, you're creating a space where people who don't ironically believe in these hate-filled ideologies can still talk on the platform and not be identified or excluded for being part of that horrible ideology. And even if people know it's ironic, although that's debatable, people will feel more legitimized in their hate-filled beliefs if they can go to a platform where they hear their hate-filled beliefs being validated. This is why, while not every person who posted on 4chan with Nazi memes was a Nazi, Nazis who go to 4chan could go there and feel more comfortable in their being a Nazi-ness. It creates that sense of belonging that is common in many cults. I think a good example of that is that Lefty Pole, the place where the Nazbol meme was born, doesn't exist anymore because 8chan was taken down, because it's been the host for tons of manifestos of far-right mass murderers. And a lot of those mass murderers made references to satirical memes that originated on that site. And I know that we think that we're all smart, but the mere exposure effect is a thing. By being exposed to these hate-filled ideas, even in an ironic or a joking sense over and over again, normalizes them in your brain. Because at the end of the day, we're not that far away from just being apes, really. And so just being exposed to the same idea over and over again normalizes it to us and makes it more palatable. It's that whole thing about the frog and the boiling water. You know, you put a frog in a cold pot of water and the temperature slowly increases. You know, the fascism gets less and less ironic over time, but you don't notice because the water is increasing in temperature so gradually. But before you know it, you're being boiled alive. And these platforms work in creating pipelines into these more horrific ideologies. And people in hate movements know that their ideas are associated with memes, and they use that to their advantage. They attach them to things like gaming memes, so that people who play games start to normalize these hateful ideas in their day-to-day life. I mean, there's an argument that you could trace the beginning of the sort of late 2010s ascent of the far right to people getting mad about women in video games. So to try to get to the bottom of this, why don't I just try talking to my Discord community about what they think about all of this? Problem, though, is that I know very much that I am a boomer. I am 8,000 years old. I don't understand what's going on. Well, if you want to talk to me, basically this is what I'm trying to figure out, is that this video is partially me trying to understand why, like, political compass memes and like why people like JREG are so popular, and like how you end up with people who have had like 16 different mutually exclusive political ideologies in like 2 months, how those people exist and what political stuff even means for them.
I think for a large portion, it's also a lot of self-identification.
It's a part of growing up where you find yourself like trying on different identities to try and sort of find what fits with you, to differentiate yourself from like your family or from other people you know at your school.
I think part of it is people, they want a label to latch onto. Some of it, I think people want to feel a little bit different. When people get into politics, they find out all of these labels and terms and stuff, and they want to figure out, oh, which one am I? And the political compass test is an easy pick to find out which ideology I am, libertarian left, libertarian right, whatever. They want to have that sense of identity from it, but the test can't actually provide them that sense of identity. I think is people want to perfectly encapsulate everything they're about into one simple label.
We are all social animals. People like being part of a group. I mean, look at my profile picture. I am quite obviously a furry.
Will be like a subculture thing. Like some people might like become like a scene kid, an emo, a punk, a goth. Kind of like in the 1960s, you had like people who became hippies because they legitimately believed in the points of the movement, but then you had others who were just like they wanted to stick it to their parents, and then like in the 80s they ended up voting for Reagan.
Getting into these weird ideologies, and like I think they kind of feel that they belong to a group or something, or like to a group that, you know, shares the same ideas they have.
And a lot of it does end up coming down to like aesthetics. Like there's a lot of people who get into a lot of the like USSR stuff because they think like all the like aesthetic of Stalin era propaganda and the military uniforms looks cool.
I think a lot of it is just like, at least that's how I found out about a lot of ideologies actually. It's just a lot of people just read like they either play a game like Hearts of Iron or some other kind of weird game that, like, you know, often mentions or somehow incorporates these ideologies.
Like, have you ever played like it's Victoria 4, 3, or whichever one it is? Like
3 is the latest one.
Okay, yeah, 3. I played that one. What I usually like to do is I would like to have reactionaries in government until I could get socialists, because the reactionaries gave me more control over the economy.
Yes, that's the same thing with me in Victoria too. I would play so many reactionary governments just simply because that was the only way I could actually do any kind of like control over the economy and not leave it up to the very confusing AI.
It seems that a lot of the political compass meme stuff comes from young people who are looking for a place to belong. Developing a political identity is a crucial part of being young, and your development of your political self being tied up with weird, ironic memes and edginess can get very weird and confusing very quickly. And this video started with me being very confused and really trying to understand this sort of new young person's game of treating basically extreme or radical politics like it's a fandom. And like, I get this too. You know, I grew up in the Greater Toronto area in the suburbs with upper middle class parents. So that, you know, class-wise would probably put me in the position of sort of a centrist liberal. But then when I was in high school, the US went on a spree of wars of conquest, and that turned me way against the established political order and looked for some radical reinterpretation, because I just saw our very normal world just launch itself into 2 completely useless wars that hurt people for essentially conquest. Oh yeah, and then when I was 19, the entire global capitalist economy collapsed too. And so I was trying to look for, spaces where I could belong, and radical politics seemed to be one of those. And very quickly I turned into an extremely insufferable person in their late teens, early 20s, because the world was on fire and we seemed to only be talking about the finer points of tax policy. And this led me to some weird places, namely early YouTube. And because of that, I, in my late teens, early 20s, held some beliefs that I today hate about myself. And part of my efforts, doing this channel, doing the activism I do, is trying to make some sort of amends for the horrible things that I believed and said in those times. Stuff that were very clearly Islamophobic and sexist. I mean, I was politically confused enough that I have an email here, one of my oldest emails, where I reached out to Stefan Molyneux. If it wasn't for the fact that I went to university from 2010 to 2013 and lived in a place where I got a total of 1 gigabyte of internet every week, I might have gone to some pretty dark places. But yeah, everything going bad made me, in 2009, become an anarchist. I watched capitalism fail. I watched the state do terrible things and then get replaced by supposedly the good guys who then continued to still do the terrible things. And I'll tell you, in 2009, being an anarchist was a very lonely thing to be. I was either pushed to be more moderate, or I was sort of a pariah, or considered, the weird extremist friend that everyone had. I still have a little bit of that, actually. But in modern day, I have found a lot more solidarity, because it turns out I'm a lot less alone than I used to be politically. So I understand that need to find, your tribe, to belong to something. But what you need to know is that you don't need to lose yourself to be part of a group. In fact, if any group pushes you to do so, that's probably a red flag and you should probably leave. You don't have to agree with everyone that you work side by side with. In fact, if you relied on agreeing with everyone all the time, you would literally have no other person that you could interact with. Be mindful, be critical, but also be kind and listen to other people with different perspectives and ideas around you. You never know. Your politics could change every day, and for the better, because the world is so much more chaotic and so much more interesting than people really think. I never really thought about it that way. Ah, you're still here? I can be my own person. I don't need to be puppeted by some master. I can forge my own identity, be who I am. Get me. No, don't do that. Don't. He's dead.